Welcome back once again to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. So today I want to discuss Lex Console, which is a web interface for Incus, and as it turns out, it's also a web interface to manage LXD servers. So I've covered LXD Dashboard by Matthew Penning of Penning Labs many times before, and LXD Dashboard cannot manage Incus servers, and so you must use Lex Console, which is also a product of Penning Labs, if what you want to manage are your Incus servers. So Lex Console supports both Incus and LXD servers, and although LXD has an integrated web GUI, Stefan Graber has no plans for a web interface for Incus. So in this tutorial, I show how to install Lex Console in an Incus container and how to configure it to manage your Incus servers. Here we are down at the command prompt on my Incus server named Mondo, and we're doing an Incus launch images :Ubuntu /2204, meaning that it's going to create an Incus container with the Ubuntu 2204 image. I'm calling the name of this container Lex Console after the name of the Lex Console product that we're going to install inside of it. And I have a theory that the reason that Matthew Penning decided to name it Lex Console was because of the prefix LXC, and we know that LXD is layered on top of Linux containers, LXC, and we also know that Incus is layered on top of Linux containers. And then we have a -- profile. Default means the default profile will use storage from the default storage pool if you look at its definition. And then we have -- profile, bridge profile, which bridges our container out onto the main LAN. And if you've watched my video entitled Incus Step by Step, we go over how to create the bridged profile to accomplish that. And then we have a switch for security.nesting equals to true. And since Lex Console is a Docker application, this will allow us to nest that Docker application inside of an Incus container. And then finally, we have -c boot.autostart equals to true. And that means that when the Incus server boots, it goes ahead and starts this particular Incus container called Lex Console. So right now it's launching that, and it has created that particular container. I can list the containers on this server with an Incus list, and all of my containers are shut down with the exception of this Lex Console container right now, which has gotten an address on my main LAN of 172.16.1.132. Let's connect to the new Incus container with the command Incus shell Lex Console. And once we're in there, let's go ahead and do an apt update && apt upgrade -y to make sure that the container is completely up to date. You notice I did not include sudo, and that's because we're signed on to the root account. Now that our container is completely upgraded, let's go ahead and add a user account for myself with an add user Scott. I provide Scott a password, and I verify that password by typing it again. After that, I do a user mod -a G sudo Scott, putting Scott into the sudo group so that Scott can have privilege. Next, we want to go ahead and install Docker and Docker Compose. We install Docker by running the script from the Docker website. And it looks like we don't have curl installed here, so we can do an apt install curl. And we say yes. Now that curl is installed, we can go back and try to install Docker from the script. With Docker now installed, we want to go ahead and install Docker Compose with an apt install docker-compose. With Docker and Docker Compose now installed, we want to go ahead and put Scott into the Docker group so that Scott can execute Docker commands without sudo. Now let's go ahead and move over to the Scott account with an su space dash space Scott. And the dash will go ahead and move me over to Scott's home folder. At this point, I'm going to do a Shift Control plus sign a couple of times to make my font a little bit bigger so that you'll be able to see the following commands a little bit more easily. I now want to make two folders. One is going to be the Lex Console folder to put the Docker file and the Docker data inside of, and the other one I'm going to call LXC Backups, which will contain the backups that we generate from using Lex Console. So we've created that. If we do an ls, you can see we have a Lex Backups and a Lex Console. Let's cd into Lex Console, and then let's do a nano on docker-compose.yml, and we find out that nano is not installed. So let's go ahead and do a sudo apt install on nano so that we have the nano editor. I go ahead and put in my sudo password, and it installs the nano editor. So now let's try that command again, nano docker-compose.yml, and let's paste in the YAML file. So let me go over this one just a little bit. First of all, the application is named Lex Console. Secondly, it is pulling that image from Penning Labs /Lex Console, we're getting the latest tagged version. And then restart unless stopped means that it will restart the container when the Incus container boots up, and then Docker starts inside of it. And then we have the port numbers here, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and change this. Well, I'll leave this port number at 80. That sounds pretty good. Since this container is dedicated to us, we know that we don't have anything else using port 80. So the next line here is /home/Scott LXC Backups, and that was that LXC Backups that we created a little bit earlier, and it's at the home folder level, and that's what's going to contain our backups, because when we run backups inside of Lex Console, we don't want them to go inside of the Lex Console container, continually making it larger and larger. So inside the container, those backups are stored in /opt/Lex Console/backups. And then we have a couple of folders that I'm creating at the same level as the Docker Compose. One is for the certificates that are added to the container, and the other one is for the server instance names and addresses themselves. So now let's do a Control-O and hit Enter to write the file out, and a Control-X to exit the nano editor. To launch our Lex Console Docker application, all we have to do is type in docker space compose space up -d, and it will go ahead and pull the container image pieces down and start the container. So let's go take a look at our file structure. If we do an ls, we have a certs folder and we have a server folder. And as a reminder, if we cd up one level higher, we also have that LXC backups folder as well, where our backups will be stored. So now we want to do an IP space A, and we look at our ETH0 device, which is right here, and it's running at 172.16.1.132, and that's what we want to go visit in our web browser. And here we are with 172.16.1.132, and we go ahead and hit enter. And there we have the Lex Console registration screen. I'm going to go ahead and give it the username Scott, the email vmsman@gmail.com. I'll go ahead and type in a password. Let's see. And go ahead and confirm that password by typing the same thing again and clicking on sign up. And I'm going to tell Bitwarden I don't want to save this particular one, and I'll go ahead and type in my username and type in my password, and we are logged in. So I tell Bitwarden to never save that, and here we go. We have our main screen with our servers. Before we add a server here, it's really a nice addition to go back down to your command prompt on your Lex console and to do a sudo nano on /etc/host and edit the local host table. In this particular case, I'm going to say 172.16.1.225, and I'm going to type in Mondo. In addition to that, I might type in another one of my Incus servers, which is 172.16.1.50, and I will have VMS mist here. So I like putting things in the local host table for my infrastructure because that way it doesn't rely on anything else being up in order to make it work. So now I do a Control O, I hit enter to write it out, and a Control X to exit the editor. Back on the Lex Console web interface screen, we can click plus server in the upper right hand corner. And this time, instead of having to enter an address, we can go ahead and type in the name of the server since we've added it to the local host table. And you notice that the two requirements are going to be the address or name of the server and then the port number. By default, the port is 8443, and that's what your port should be if you followed my previous tutorials on creating your Incus server. The proxy is not a requirement, and you can just leave SSL verify as false. If we were to click submit right now, we would get an error that says it's unable to retrieve server information, and the reason for that is because the Lex Console certificate is not yet trusted by this server. So I go ahead and click OK, and then I click plus server again, and this time I click here for instructions on adding a certificate. I want to go ahead and select everything between begin certificate and end certificate, right click and do a copy. Then we go ahead and head down to the command prompt, but we want to go ahead and exit out of our Lex Console Incus container and exit again to get out of the root on that container. And I want to be all the way back at my Incus host, or you should SSH into whatever your Incus host is. At this point, I want to do a nano on LXConsole.crt for the certificate, and I want to go ahead and do a Shift Control V to paste that certificate in the nano editor, a Control O and an enter to write the file out, and a Control X to exit the Nano editor. Back on the web interface, I'm going to click anywhere to deselect this certificate and then scroll down. Since Lex Console can manage both LXD servers and Incus servers, and I know that Mondo is an Incus server, I'm copying the command for the Incus server here, which is an Incus config trust add certificate LXConsole.crt. I go ahead and copy that. Back at the terminal, I do a Shift-Control-V to do the Incus config trust add certificate LXConsole.crt. And once I perform that command, it allows Mondo to trust the LXC console container application to be able to access Mondo to gather what it needs. Once again, we head back to the web interface and we make a copy of the second Incus command here. And we do a right click and a copy, and we head down to the command terminal where we do a Shift-Control-V and we do an Incus config set core.https underbar address to port 8443. Now that we have a trust correctly added for Mondo, we can dismiss this screen by hitting the dismiss button. And now we can go ahead and click submit, and this time it will add Mondo to our instance of LXConsole, and this is the first server that we can manage. Now you notice here it says LXD servers, and that's not entirely true. In fact, I passed that information along to Matthew Penning, and I'm hoping he changes that, because the servers that are listed down here can be either Incus servers or LXD servers, and in this case Mondo is an Incus server. So now if I click on Mondo, you can see that it says it has one container that is running and 6 virtual machines that are all stopped. That's why 0% of them are running. And it's calling out the server that it is running on, which happens to be a Dell XPS 8930 with 32 gigs of memory. Anyway, you can go out here and you can look at all the other settings that Lex Console has and what it lets you do. I believe I've covered Lex Console also in another video that you can take a look at. Let's go ahead and add VMS Mist to the list of servers that we can manage, and we'll do that by going up and clicking on Servers again, clicking on Plus Server, and then going ahead and clicking here for instructions on trusting certificates, and then we'll go ahead and make a copy from begin certificate to end certificate like we did the first time. So once we make that copy, we'll go ahead and go down to the terminal, and this time we'll do an SSH over to VMS Mist, which is going to be our other Incus server that we want to manage. Once we get here, we'll do a nano on Lex Console .crt, and then there's a certificate in there already because I have another trust I added, and I'll go ahead and paste this one in, and I'll do a Control-O and hit enter to save that out, and a Control-Exit to exit the editor. And then now all I have to do is add that certificate trust again, and since I've already added the other command, I don't have to worry about the second command that we entered because this server's been previously used. But if I did, I could just simply come back up here again, uncheck this, and then go down and grab this Incus config set core address, copy that, and then go ahead and drop down to the prompt and issue that command. So basically it is go edit the certificate file, add the trust, and then add the core address to allow things to access it. And then once that has happened, we can go back up here and dismiss that screen go ahead and say we want to add VMS Mist, and since VMS Mist has a trust, it'll go ahead and add it to this list. Notice the proxy line is blank, and that's because we didn't enter a proxy, but I didn't feel like we needed it since our DNS name is here, letting us know what the name of that server is. So here I click on VMS Mist, and it sees the 24 containers that VMS Mist has got. If I click on those containers, there's the listing. So in summary, Lex Console has added some very nice GUI elements that improve the user interface experience over the original LXD Dashboard. And now that I've converted my production servers to Incus, I use Lex Console as my primary web interface to manage my containers. And Matthew Penning at Penning Labs is doing some great work, so support him if you can over at his Penning Labs GitHub site. Anyway, that's it for today. Please subscribe and like the channel, and don't forget to hit that notification bell, and we'll see you next time.